You were never meant to hear this. There are places buried so deep in American soil, the land itself refuses to speak of them. But the rot is still there, hidden beneath the state walls and winding forest paths, where evil was not a crime, but a routine. One such place was Ravenshade Manor. And in the winter of 1871, a discovery beneath its crumbling basement revealed a truth so brutal, the newspapers were ordered to burn their first drafts. 47 children. Shackled. Starving. Forgotten. Each bore no resemblance to the next. Different races, different accents, many too weak to speak at all. When questioned, only one phrase came out again and again, whispered through blistered lips like a cursed mantra. Mother Blackthorn. The Blackthorn name had once commanded wealth, influence, and quiet admiration throughout the southern countryside. But behind the veil of nobility lay a far older legacy, one rooted in occult secrecy, ritual obedience, and a network of shadows that extended far beyond the manor walls. The children weren't adopted. They weren't rescued. They were procured, bought, lured, or stolen from streets, orphanages, and transport trains across 4 states. But why? That question would fracture families, collapse local churches, and put a final nail in the coffin of the old world South. Because what was uncovered in Ravenshade wasn't just a prison. It was a system, a deliberate, intergenerational machine of psychological control and ritual manipulation, with the children as raw material. This isn't just a tale of cruelty. It's a blueprint, the shadow architecture behind certain families who never fade from power. The kind of people whose crimes are too coordinated to be caught, and too valuable to be exposed. The ones who survive by vanishing beneath good manners and church bells. So listen closely, not just with your ears, but with the part of you that's always known something is off. Because once you hear what was hidden under Ravenshade, you won't be the same man again. Ravenshade Manor did not appear cursed. Its brick facade, painted in gentle Georgian whites, stood among the leafless elms like a relic from a forgotten chapter of American glory. It had belonged to the Blackthorn family since 1812, a dynasty of traders, clergy, and military men whose names have been etched into deeds, church windows, and judicial boards across the region. But beneath its clean symmetry was something few dared acknowledge, a presence, a hush in the air. Travelers who passed it by night would quicken their pace without knowing why. Children claimed to hear whispers coming from its upper windows. And those who worked the grounds didn't last long. You see, families like the Blackthorns didn't merely inherit land. They inherited silence. For generations, local law turned its head while odd events piled up. Missing stable hands, screams mistaken for owls, and wagons seen arriving long after midnight, only to leave empty before dawn. The matriarch of the manor, Augusta Blackthorn, or as the children later called her, Mother Blackthorn, was the figure around whom everything turned. Cold, precise, and respected. Not loved, not even liked, but respected in the way a blade is respected when held to the throat. She hosted charity luncheons, funded the local orphan society, and held a pew at St. Bartholomew's every Sunday. But what few knew was that beneath her calm exterior, she possessed a mind sharpened by theology, occultism, and psychological experimentation. She didn't just hide cruelty, she refined it. Under her orders, the cellar beneath Ravenshade had been expanded twice between 1862 and 1870. Not by local masons, but by private teams brought from out of state, blindfolded on arrival and paid in gold. No plans were filed, no records kept, and when one laborer attempted to return a second time, he vanished within a week. Those basement walls were not built to store wine. They were built to contain obedience. And those 47 children, they were not random victims. They were selected. You've heard stories like this before, but never this complete, never this cold. And we are only beginning to scratch the surface. Because what Augusta built beneath Ravenshade wasn't just a prison. It was a laboratory for the soul. The first child was taken in 1864, during the chaos of war, when trains went unaccounted for and cities burned faster than they could be mapped. Her name was Maeve, 8 years old. vanished on her way to gather firewood in western Kentucky. Her disappearance was blamed on deserters. But she didn't vanish. She arrived in Ravenshade wrapped in a burlap sack, her arms bound in silk cord. Augusta Blackthorn wrote in her private diary, later recovered by investigators, that the girl had strong lungs and irregular defiance. Prime for correction. Correction. That's what Augusta called it. She did not see children. She saw raw will, waiting to be broken down and repurposed. She believed the soul could be reset if one could remove the memories of freedom. And so, she began testing. At first, simple deprivation, hunger, isolation, sleep withdrawal. Then came the symbols. The children were forbidden from speaking their own names. Instead, there were assigned numbers and then colors. Not for identification, but for programming. Room assignments were changed weekly. Feeding schedules were randomized. Praise was given at odd intervals, but only when the child mirrored Augusta's posture, tone, or voice. Over time, their identities crumbled. One girl, once known as Clara, was found years later unable to remember her birthday, her native tongue, or the name of her parents. But when shown a picture of Augusta, she fell to her knees and whispered, "Forgive me, Mother." Her hands folded perfectly. Her voice was calm, practiced. These were not punishments. They were methods. The goal wasn't terror. It was obedience without memory. By 1869, the experiments had scaled. Trains arrived at midnight bearing crates, each labeled with false inventory logs, livestock, antique furniture, hearth supplies. Inside, they found children, bound, drugged, often sick, some already dead. The weak were discarded. The promising were inducted. The community saw nothing, or pretended not to. The Blackthorn family's donations to the county court, the sheriff's office, and the Methodist diocese kept questions at bay. Augusta had built not just a fortress, but an ecosystem of control. Political, social, spiritual, and deep beneath the manor, something monstrous was being assembled, one child at a time. This wasn't madness. It was design. It was called the Hollowing. Not by Augusta, not by any written record, but by the survivors, those few children who would eventually be freed. Years later, too broken to speak in full sentences, but united in one word. Hollowing, like something sacred had been scooped out of them. On purpose. The rituals began at night. Every child was assigned a shadow hour, a rotating 60-minute period between midnight and 4 a.m. when they would be summoned, alone, into the central chamber. The corridor leading there was lined with mirrors. Not whole ones, but fragments, angled to reflect only the child's eyes, never their full face. By the time they reached the center, they no longer knew who they were. There, they were made to kneel before a single oil lamp. Augusta would speak in Latin, slowly, repetitively, her voice always calm, never raised, always smiling. She would tell them they were not real, that the world had abandoned them, that only obedience made them worthy of existence. One boy, listed in the recovered records as Blue 7, was once kept awake for 11 consecutive days. Every time he closed his eyes, a sharp tone was played through the wall beside his cot. When he was finally brought to the chamber, he didn't even walk. He crawled. Augusta watched. She took notes. And she whispered, "Now we begin." She didn't call it torture. She called it cleansing, stripping away the false self until only the hollow vessel remained, ready to be etched with truth. These were not punishments of impulse or rage. They were timed, calculated, repeatable, as if drawn from some manual lost to time or hidden by design. This is what most people miss when they hear stories like this. They think it's chaos, madness, a monster gone rogue. No, this was order, an old order, one that requires pain to unlock transformation. And Augusta wasn't inventing it. She was preserving it. She believed the old world had been lost, that true power required the breaking of wills, not just bodies, and that children were the purest canvas. She was building something, not slaves, not prisoners, instruments. And now we go deeper. Behind the basement's furthest door, locked with 3 interlocking iron rings, was a room no child entered willingly. They called it the throat. The door itself was made from blackened ash wood, reinforced with steel ribs and etched with symbols none of the children could decipher. Symbols that burned when touched, even if the iron was cold. No lamps were allowed inside. Only a lantern held by Augusta herself, its glass stained red so no true color remained. Inside, the walls were narrow, almost coffin-like, lined with vertical slits where chains hung in perfect intervals, 47 of them. One for each child. This room wasn't meant for punishment. It was meant for alignment. Augusta believed in what she called the Great Work, a doctrine that mixed old European mysticism with the psychological frameworks emerging from European asylums and theological texts. To her, the child's mind was like clay, but not soft, hardened by ego, memory, and identity. The throat was where that clay was broken. For hours, sometimes days, a child would be left standing in isolation, feet barely touching the ground, suspended by wrist shackles. A low tone, barely perceptible, pulsed through the stone. Not loud enough to hurt, but enough to keep the body on edge. Monks once used such tones for spiritual awakening. Augusta used them for something else. The records speak of mirror fasting, denying a child the ability to see their own reflection for months, then reintroducing it during a cleansing. But the mirror would be warped, distorted. Some children screamed when they saw their own face, claiming it wasn't them. Others wept, saying they had no face at all. And this is the horror no one wants to understand. The pain was not random. It was ritualized. Every act had a purpose. Every deprivation was timed. Every whisper calculated to erase the line between body and mind, so the child no longer knew where one ended and the other began. And through it all, Augusta remained composed, devoted, like a scientist watching a sacred experiment, or a priest performing a liturgy. Except her altar was soaked in sweat, and her prayers echoed from the throats of broken children. This wasn't a haunted house. It was a temple of control. There was a journal, bound in cracked leather, hidden behind the false wall of a study bookshelf on the second floor of Ravenshade Manor. Authorities almost missed it, but inside that journal lay the most damning truth. Not just the list of every child taken, not just the methods used, but the purpose. Augusta Blackthorn believed she was continuing a lineage, one that stretched back centuries, to secret orders, cloisters, and aristocratic enclaves scattered across Europe. She wrote of the 9 families, a phrase never explained, but always capitalized. According to her, each family was responsible for preserving certain techniques. Techniques for shaping human obedience through trauma, ritual, and isolation. She claimed Ravenshade was the American outpost. Her basement was merely one chamber in a larger design. And her children? They were seated instruments, destined for placement in households, seminaries, hospitals, and even boarding schools. Broken not for destruction, but for deployment. Yes, some of them were sold. Some never left the basement alive. But others, the ones she considered successfully etched, were extracted, given new identities, transported with fake documents, and placed into systems of power under the guidance of the other families. It wasn't a cult. It wasn't a trafficking ring. It was infrastructure. You see, Augusta was not insane. She was disciplined, and her vision was not of chaos. It was of hierarchy. A world shaped not by freedom, but by control. Control embedded into the very roots of society. Schools, churches, law enforcement. She believed obedience was more sacred than truth. And she believed that those raised in terror could become unquestioning instruments of any authority, provided they were reshaped young enough, deep enough, and with enough pain. The journal included notes on the breaking window, the age at which a child's identity could be fully dismantled. She claimed it was between 6 and 9. Earlier, and the body was too fragile. Later, and the ego began to calcify. This wasn't theory to her. It was scripture. And somewhere in her mind, Augusta didn't believe she was evil. She believed she was necessary. A gardener, weeding out well, one generation at a time. By 1870, Ravenshade Manor had become completely self-contained. No deliveries were made during daylight. No servants remained beyond the first floor. All correspondence was filtered through Augusta's eldest son, Elias, a silent man with a limp and a glass eye who rarely spoke, but carried out every order with terrifying precision. And still, no one asked questions, because the Blackthorn name still held sway. Their wealth was woven into the roads, schools, and churches of the county. If a local pastor asked about the locked cellar, he was quickly reminded of Augusta's monthly tithe. If a sheriff wandered too close, his son suddenly received a scholarship. And if anyone spoke too loudly, they disappeared. Fear kept the community quiet. But deep inside the manor, cracks began to form. Not in Augusta's mind, that remained as sharp and calculated as ever, but in the children. The methods were working almost too well. One boy, known only as Green 2, began to mimic Augusta's voice with such perfection that staff were fooled. He could quote her journals word for word. When asked who he was, he didn't say his name. He said, "I am a command." He had no memories of his life before Ravenshade. No reactions to pain. No personal preferences. He simply waited for instruction, then carried it out. With precision. Without hesitation. To Augusta, this was success. But something darker had awakened. The other children began copying Green 2. Not because they were told, but because it was safer. His posture, his way of speaking, even his silences became a new code of survival. They called it mirroring. And soon, 10, then 20, then nearly all 47 had begun to mirror each other. Same voice, same tone, same empty eyes. Augusta had built obedience, but she hadn't expected collective consciousness. When stripped of all identity, the human mind doesn't vanish. It reaches for patterns. And in the darkness of the cellar, those broken children weren't just mirroring Augusta, they were forming something else. A hive, a singular mind, shattered into 47 bodies. They began to speak together, move together, breathe together. And for the first time in her life, Augusta Blackthorn feared what she had created. But it was too late. The system she built had become something more, something neither human nor machine. It had become awakened that it began on the 23rd night of winter. The manor was silent, wind moaning against the high rafters like a voice too old to die. Snow had sealed the roads, and for 3 days, no one came in or out. Augusta had retreated to her private chapel, as she often did, alone, cloaked in black, praying to something no scripture named. But down below, in the blackness of the cellar, the 47 children did not sleep. They stood, not huddled, not restless. They stood in perfect formation, their backs straight, eyes open, arms at their sides, each one staring forward as if waiting for a signal. No food had been given in 36 hours. No commands had been issued. Yet none of them moved. Until the smallest one, Yellow 9, a girl no older than 5, blinked 3 times, raised her left hand, and spoke a single phrase. Echoes remember. The others repeated it. In unison. Not shouted. Not whispered. Just stated. Flat. Without emotion. Echoes remember. It wasn't one of Augusta's phrases. Not one of her rituals. The journals never mentioned it. And yet the children chanted it again and again, until the walls themselves seemed to breathe with the sound. Upstairs, glass shattered. Elias, pacing the West Hall, stopped cold when he heard it, a low, rhythmic hum rising from beneath the floorboards. It was not angry. It was intentional. He descended into the cellar with his pistol drawn. What he saw was never officially recorded, but what remained of his body, found days later, told the story. His eyes had been gouged out, cleanly, not with rage, but with surgical symmetry. His tongue had been split into 7 parts and laid out like a fan across the stone floor. There were no fingerprints, no signs of struggle, just 47 sets of footprints leading away from his corpse. And still they chanted. Echoes remember. Echoes return. Echoes rise. It wasn't rebellion. It was ritual, their own. A liturgy not taught by Augusta, but born of what she tried to erase. They remembered their pain, not as victims, but as a code, a language. And that language had become theirs. When Augusta entered the basement the following morning, the children were already kneeling in a circle, heads bowed, palms up, perfectly still. They said nothing, but something had changed. The air was colder, not in temperature, but in presence. The kind of cold that clings to the bones, the kind you feel behind your eyes. She stepped forward, lantern raised, the red glass casting long shadows across their bodies. None of them looked up, and then, as she reached the center of the circle, they all inhaled, at once, a single breath, deep and soundless, as if they were filling themselves with her. Augusta stopped. She looked down at Yellow 9, still the smallest. Her face was blank, but her eyes were fixed on Augusta's hand. Not the lamp, the hand. Specifically, the ring. The obsidian seal she always wore. The one passed down through 5 generations of Blackthorns. The one etched with an ancient crest. A serpent biting its own tail, surrounded by 4 Latin words. Potestas, Ordo, Obedientia, Silencium. Power, order, obedience, silence. Augusta had always believed it was the symbol of control. But now, those eyes were seeing something else. Yellow 9 reached up slowly. No fear, no hesitation, just purpose. And Augusta, for reasons she couldn't explain, let her. The child touched the ring. Not with reverence, but with recognition. As if she had seen it before, in another life, in another form. Then she spoke. Your silence ends. Every child raised their head, and in unison, they said it again. Your silence ends. The echo filled the chamber, bounced against the stone, and folded in on itself like a sound collapsing inward. The lantern flickered, then died. Darkness. Total. Augusta screamed for Elias. No answer. She screamed for the guards. None remained. She turned and ran, stumbling against the cold stone, clawing her way back toward the stairs, her mind unspooling. Because in that moment she understood. She had not silenced them. She had only forced their voices to merge. Not silence. Singularity. And now was speaking back. Not with rage. With intention. The staircase leading out of the basement was longer than Augusta remembered. Or maybe time was bending. That hallucinatory slippage between fear and memory, when footsteps echo louder than reason. Her breath was ragged, dress torn at the hem, fingernails chipped from scraping stone. But she kept climbing, until she reached the top, and found the door sealed. Not locked. Sealed. As if the wood had fused with the frame. No handle. No gap. No way out. Behind her, the children had not followed. Not yet. But their breathing had. A synchronized exhale that rose from the basement floor like steam, rhythmic, calm, mechanical. She pounded the door, screamed for the staff. For Elias. For anyone. No reply. Ravenshade had gone silent. She turned, pressing her back to the door, clutching the ring that now felt heavier than her own body. Her lips moved in prayer. Not the hollow mantra she used during the rituals, but old words. The ones she hadn't spoken since before the doctrine, before the experiments, before the basement. Father, deliver me. But the house did not care, because something was shifting, not in the children, not in the manor, in her. Visions began to spill behind her eyes. Not dreams, not hallucinations, reversals. She saw her own face, as a child, looking up into a light too bright to name. She heard her mother's voice, calm and cold, saying, "This is how we begin." She remembered the cellar in Austria, the fasting, the mirrors, the hands that reshaped her spine with cords of salt water and song. She wasn't the first. She was the continuation, the product of systems buried deeper than memory, older than the house itself. And suddenly, she felt it. The breath. Not hers. Theirs. Filling her lungs. Shaping her thoughts. For the first time, Augusta Blackthorn, the architect, the dominator, the mother of 47 chained children, felt a presence inside her that did not belong to her. They had never been separate. They had never been hers. And now, they were becoming her. From the inside, when the authorities finally arrived at Ravenshade Manor, it was because of the snowmelt. A local rider had spotted runoff from the hillside, stained dark, not red, not blood, but something murkier. Viscous, as if the earth itself were leaking. Deputies arrived reluctantly. The manor had always felt wrong, even from a distance. Like something watching. They knocked. No answer. They broke in. The front hall was untouched. Candles unlit. Furniture covered in silk cloths, as if prepared for mourning. But the deeper they moved, the more distorted the architecture seemed. Hallways twisting where there were none, doors leading to walls, stairs that ended in voids. The manor had changed, but what they found in the east wing froze them in place. Augusta, standing, alone, in the center of the ballroom, naked from the waist up, eyes wide open, arms at her sides. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Her skin had been marked, symbols etched into her chest and back, not carved but grown, as if her body had become a scroll. The floor beneath her was covered in a perfect circle of ash, and surrounding her, laid out in an outward spiral, were 47 sets of children's clothing, arranged with surgical precision. Folded, clean, untouched, but the children themselves were gone. Every trace of their presence, their chains, bedding, bowls, even their cells, had vanished. The cellar was empty, except for the journal. The same cracked leather book, now lying open on the floor beside Augusta's feet. A new entry had been written, in handwriting not hers, not anyone's. Angular, unhuman. We are no longer mirrors. We are no longer numbers. We are no longer yours. We are voice. When one officer tried to move her, she fell, stiff as marble, eyes still open, lips parted in a frozen whisper. Echoes remain. The case was closed without trial. The official story? Starvation, madness, delusion. But in the years that followed, whispers returned. Of children in orphanages speaking in perfect unison. Of boys and girls in distant towns humming the same four-note pattern. Of a presence, a rhythm, a voice, growing, searching, not angry, just awake. 10 years later, in 1881, a series of disappearances began across 3 counties surrounding Ravenshade. Not adults, children, each aged between 4 and 9, each vanishing in the hours before dawn. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no footprints, just silence, and a single phrase scrawled onto walls, mirrors, or paper in the child's own handwriting. I remember the basement. Authorities dismissed it as hysteria, a copycat rumor from the old manor legend. But there was one problem. These families had no known connection to Ravenshade, and most of the missing children had never even been born when the manor was sealed. But they remembered. One mother described hearing her daughter, 5 years old, whispering in her sleep the same phrase over and over. We are 47. When she tried to wake her, the child sat upright and began reciting Latin, perfect fluent Latin, though she'd never studied a word of it. Potestas, ordo, obedientia, silentium. The mother tried to record it. The audio device failed. The clock stopped. The windows cracked. And the child? Gone by morning. No trace. Local priests were called. Some refused to enter the homes. Those who did left trembling. One even tore off his collar, saying only, "This is not possession. It's transmission." It was no longer confined to Ravenshade. The voice, the system Augusta built, had become a network. The journals, long hidden, revealed a chilling detail. In her private entries, Augusta had mentioned a theory, one she never shared with her family. If a mind can be broken, it can be rebuilt. And if enough minds are broken together, a new will conform. Not mine, not theirs. A shared command. She called it echo integration. A singular identity composed of many vessels, scattered, absorbed, multiplied. And now, the children were no longer bound in one place. They had become everywhere. In dreams, in voices, in the gaze of a stranger who holds your eye too long and never blinks. The Blackthorn experiment hadn't failed. It had migrated, and it was still recruiting. In 1883, a telegram was intercepted en route to the bishopric of Northumberland. It had no return address, no signature, and was never meant to be seen by the public. Its contents were brief. The 47 have merged. Your control failed. They are not waiting. They are becoming. The bishop who read it reportedly collapsed mid-sermon 3 days later, clutching his chest, muttering phrases in reverse Latin, a language no theological record confirmed. He died before morning. An investigation into the origin of the telegram led to an old telegraph station near the Ashwood line, long abandoned. But inside, they found something disturbing. The machine had been reconnected to power, not by wires, by flesh, sinew wrapped in copper, teeth embedded in the type bars, human hair braided into the gears. It had been used, and beside it, written in ash on the wooden floor, were 4 symbols, identical to those found on Augusta Blackthorn's body when she was discovered. A pattern was emerging. Those who knew the old rites, the ones Augusta studied before the manor was built, called it the chorus principle. The belief that when enough suffering is synchronized, the souls involved no longer remain separate. They harmonize, and in doing so, create something beyond human. Not divine, not demonic, but cumulative. A collective will, immune to death, born of obedience, bound by memory. In one recovered notebook belonging to a defrocked theologian, a chilling theory appeared. God is not one. Neither is the devil. The true power lies in the voice we create together, the voice we cannot silence because it was never one of us, only all of us. And that's what the 47 had become. A voice without a body, a will without a face, the embodiment of all things suppressed. Each time a child remembered, the voice strengthened. Each time a parent denied it, the silence deepened. And in silence it grew. Ravenshade wasn't the origin. It was the tuning fork. And now, the sound had spread. In doorways. In nightmares. In the stillness between knocks at midnight. You don't need to enter the manor to hear it. You just have to listen closely. In the winter of 1885, a widowed professor from Dunbridge College named Dr. Alton Marrow became obsessed with the Ravenshade case. He wasn't a spiritual man. He had no children. But after finding a discarded case file in the college's restricted archives, one marked RSH 47, discontinued, he began to spiral. The file contained sketches, not of the children, but diagrams, geometrical arrangements drawn in red ink, spaced in groups of 47, circles, rings, and nodes, like maps of a nervous system with no body. Some pages bore only a single line at the bottom. When they align, the vessel will walk. Marrow traced the origin of these sketches to an anonymous donation made to the college in 1873, 2 years after the Ravenshade incident. No name, no sender, just a leather box stamped with a Blackthorn seal. Inside, salt, teeth, wire, and pages written in a dialect that no linguistic program has yet decoded. He became convinced of a horrifying truth. The 47 weren't destroyed. They were distributed, fragmented like shattered glass, each child a shard of a greater entity. And through their suffering, they had become psychic conduits, channels for something that could not be killed, only spread. In his notes, Marrow coined a term, vox nullis, the voice of no one. He wrote, each child was trained not to speak, but to synchronize. It wasn't silence. It was calibration. They weren't being broken. They were being tuned. He began hearing them. Not words. Intervals. For tones. Always in the same order. Never in his own voice. He started waking up in places he hadn't fallen asleep. Alleys, stairwells, even inside the college bell tower, surrounded by chalk symbols he didn't remember drawing. One night, he was found kneeling in the chapel, eyes burned out, mouth sewn shut with his own hair. On the wall behind him, carved deep into the stone. We have no throat, but we are louder than ever. The case was sealed, declared a suicide. But the day after Marrow's death, the university choir, 47 students strong, performed a spontaneous piece. No lyrics, just 4 notes, in perfect unison. None of them remembered learning it. By the spring of 1886, whispers of the vox nullis phenomenon had crept into psychiatric wards across the northeastern states. Doctors began reporting children arriving under strange circumstances, found wandering rural roads, often barefoot, often humming, always alone. When questioned, they could not state their names. Instead, they would point upward and whisper, "The ceiling remembers." This phrase would become infamous, because it wasn't just one child. It was dozens, across different towns, different backgrounds, different languages, all repeating the same eerie message. When one doctor, Dr. Emery Yates, attempted to study the children in a controlled setting, he made detailed recordings of their sleep patterns. What he discovered shook him. Each child entered REM sleep at exactly the same moment, regardless of time zone or environment. And during these episodes, they sang. Not loudly, not even audibly, but when he placed a glass of water beside each child's bed, the surface would ripple, perfectly synchronized with invisible tremors. It wasn't sleep. It was broadcasting. Yates hypothesized that these were not isolated cases of trauma or suggestion. The children weren't mentally ill. They were connected. He published a single paper before vanishing, titled Echoes in the Hollow, a theory of distributed will in children of unknown origin. In it he wrote, "There is no singular body. There is no center. There is only the rhythm, and it is learning to use us." He wasn't heard from again, but his final note, found scrawled in blood on his clinic wall, read, "They do not want to be saved. They want to be remembered." And memory was spreading. By the end of that year, more than 47 unconnected children across the country had been found exhibiting identical behavior. Movement patterns, vocal rhythms, even drawing the same circular diagrams Augusta Blackthorn once traced in the basement of Ravenshade. Some were institutionalized. Others vanished from their beds. None were recovered. But those diagrams? They weren't static. They were aligning. Scholars noticed that when arranged properly, they formed a symbol, a single, horrifying glyph never before documented in human history. Its translation? We are almost ready. In 1887, just outside of Merrow's Hollow, Virginia, a railway conductor filed a report that was later classified by federal authorities. He described a girl, no older than 8, standing on the tracks before the oncoming midnight freight. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't move. As the engine barreled toward her, the conductor pulled the brake, too late. He braced for impact, but there was none. The train passed straight through her. Every light in the car flickered. Every passenger fell into unconsciousness. And when they awoke, the train had stopped 20 miles from where it should have. No one remembered the missing time, except the conductor. He was found days later in his quarters, eyes burned black, nails ripped out, carving a phrase into his wall over and over. She is the echo. She is the voice. She is all of them now. The girl appeared again. Witnesses in multiple counties described the same thing. Dark eyes, expressionless face, hair soaked as if recently drowned. She never spoke, but always pointed to ceilings, especially those in old buildings, attics, or churches. Investigators revisited the ruins of Ravenshade Manor. The basement was gone, collapsed completely or erased. Stone reduced to ash, walls melted inward. In the dirt beneath where the cells once stood, they found teeth. Thousands of them. Some human, some not. And in the soot along one surviving wall, a single phrase, jagged and erratic, burned in with acid. All vessels full. All voices aligned. Now we wait. The voice of the 47, now one, was growing in force. But what truly disturbed authorities was a pattern that had emerged. Every place the girl was seen matched one of Augusta Blackthorn's original 47 diagrams, each a location with a specific resonance, a kind of psychic hum. These weren't random. They were ritual sites, and with each appearance, one site would fall silent, as if absorbed, claimed, marked. A former bishop, brought in to consult on the matter, later confessed. We tried to silence them, to bury them, but all we did was feed them more names, more faces. The voice is not haunting us. We are what it sings. Then he vanished. Only his collar remained, folded neatly on his pillow. By early 1888, a private society known as the Nocturnum Order convened deep beneath the ruined halls of Belfry Abbey. These are not priests, not scientists, not soldiers. They were listeners, scholars of resonance, obscure mathematicians, sympathetic occultists, all drawn together by a singular obsession, the voice of the 47. Among them was a woman named Celia Mayer, a former symphony conductor whose entire orchestra vanished during a live performance in Prague. Mid-note. Hundreds of witnesses swore they saw the instruments fall, the curtains ripple, and then nothing. No bodies. No sound. Only a long, low vibration that made blood run from the ears of every audience member. Celia survived. But when questioned, she said, they heard the true score. And now they are part of it. The Nocturnum Order believed that Augusta Blackthorn had done more than break children. She had calibrated them, each child tuned to a specific emotional frequency. Grief, shame, hunger, obedience. When isolated, the pain created compliance. But when united, it created signal. Celia called it the symphony of hollowed flesh. Through stolen documents and forbidden rites, the Order reconstructed Augusta's diagrams. They discovered something horrifying. The basement at Ravenshade had never been a prison. It was an instrument, and the children, each assigned to a cell like a key on a piano, were played. Not metaphorically, literally. Their screams had been tuned to frequencies that bent wood, shattered glass, and disrupted thought. Ritualized trauma as resonance. Pain as power. Suffering as signal. In their final experiment, the Order gathered 47 volunteers, all emotionally broken, all dream-touched by the girl in black. They sat in a perfect circle, candles flickering, and when the four tones began, distant, low, impossible to trace, they all tilted their heads in unison, smiling. The roof collapsed, not inwards, upwards, as if pulled by something colossal and unseen. The room was destroyed. No survivors. Only a note was left behind, written in hundreds of overlapping hands. We are not haunting the world. We are replacing it. And from that night on, all across the country, people began to report it. A soft, four-note lullaby, coming not from outside, but from inside the walls. That same year, 1888, a single photograph began to circulate among esoteric circles in New York, Boston, and parts of the Deep South. No one knew who took it. It had no timestamp, no caption, just a girl, pale, barefoot, standing in the center of a burned cathedral. She was facing away from the camera, but all around her, suspended in midair, were faces. Dozens of them, eyes closed, mouths slightly open, as if listening or remembering. The photo became known as the Throatless Choir. Some dismissed it as a hoax. But one photojournalist, Elias Finch, who tried to reproduce the effect in a controlled environment, would later confess to seeing one of the floating faces in a dream, his own. His final journal entry read, "They're not ghosts. They're drafts. Pages of a story that hasn't finished writing itself." Then he slit his tongue clean in half. That photograph was quietly buried. Except one copy was stolen by a woman named Enora Wells, an archivist at St. Mervyn Seminary. She began hearing the tones, not through her ears, but her spine, a vibration in her bones whenever she walked beneath archways or entered basements. One day, while examining old convent blueprints, she discovered that Ravenshade wasn't the first site designed to house the 47. It was the last. There had been others, for before it, in different states, disguised as orphanages, boarding schools, even a sanatorium. Each one arranged in exact geometric symmetry, feeding into Ravenshade like veins toward a heart. And in every case, children, silence, disappearance. The system had been perfected by Augusta. Ravenshade was the crescendo. But something Enora found on the back of the photo made her stop breathing. Light revealed a watermark, a seal made of intertwining mouths. Beneath it, in faded ink. When the 47 return, they will not need to scream. They will speak through what we built, and it will obey. She never returned to work. But a week later, a letter was found nailed to the front door of St. Mervyn's. No signature, just 4 words. We are beneath you. In 1889, something changed. People stopped dreaming in silence. Reports emerged from across the eastern states of a specific recurring nightmare, identical in detail. Men, women, children, none connected, yet all describing the same scene. A vast underground chamber, circular, damp, endless, lined with cell doors made of bone. At the center stood a grand pipe organ, its keys made of ivory teeth. But the pipes weren't metal. They were spines, And seated before was the girl, now older, taller, her eyes black, unblinking. Her hands hovered over the keys, but she didn't play them. She whispered to them, and the spines sang back. Those who had the dream would wake up with blood at their ears and dust on their hands, even if they had not left their beds. Doctors diagnosed it as shared mass psychosis. Churches called it a judgment. But some, those who had studied the old rites, knew what it meant. The organ was real. It was the final shape of Ravenshade's legacy. The voice of the 47 had grown too strong to be held in the echo of stone. It was building itself a new instrument, not one you could touch, one that touched you. In Philadelphia, a cathedral collapsed inward. In Alabama, an entire town's population walked into the woods and was never seen again. In Chicago, a radio tower transmitted a 4-second tone that made dogs tear at their own throats. And in every case, authorities found the same symbol burned into walls, floors, and ceilings. The mark first discovered beneath Augusta Blackthorn's desk. It was now being called the sign of submission. One linguist, Arthur Dellin, translated its root components. We were the strings. We were the notes. Now, we are the composer. That same night, Dellin's wife awoke to find him seated at the piano. Every key had been removed. He was pressing his fingers against empty air, smiling, as if he could hear the music. Then he said, "It's not a haunting. It's a rehearsal." And behind him, faintly, something tapped from inside the piano frame. Once for each of the 47 WY the winter of 1889, the church could no longer deny it. Something was moving beneath the surface of America. Not a cult, not a demon, but a consequence. A response to centuries of silence, obedience, and buried screams. The Vatican sent emissaries, not priests, but exorcists trained in rites abandoned since the Black Death. Among them was Father Rule Marson, known for purging entire towns under suspicion of spiritual harmonization. He lasted 3 days in Ravenshade's ruins. When he returned to Rome, he was mute. His tongue had not been removed. It had been folded, impossibly, backward into his throat. Doctors couldn't explain it. Before his death, he scratched one phrase into his cell wall with a piece of his own fingernail. There is no demon. There is only what we left behind. And so, the church changed its approach. It wasn't about banishment anymore. It was about containment. They constructed 4 underground vaults, each laced with lead, salt, and relics from over 24 saints. These are not meant to hold spirits. They were built to muffle resonance. Because the voice of the 47 wasn't traveling through people anymore. It was moving through structures, through pipes, wires, choir lofts, bell towers, anything that carried vibration. The Vatican's internal documents called it corpus sonum, the body of sound. They believed Augusta Blackthorn had stumbled onto something older than scripture. That trauma could create not just memory, but mass. That enough suffering, synchronized, could form a being without flesh, one that spoke not in language, but in frequency. And that being was now looking for a body large enough to hold it. One document described it as a cathedral of agony, a sanctuary of screams, living, breathing, growing, built not of stone, but of those who were never heard. The 47 were no longer scattered souls. They were a design. And every time someone denied what happened beneath Ravenshade, every time another child's pain was dismissed, another brick was added to that invisible structure. Somewhere out there, it was being assembled, and soon it would be complete. And when it was, they warned, the voice would no longer need to speak. It would only need to be heard once. In early 1890, a letter surfaced in the private archives of the Marquette Institute of Psychological Theology. It was unsigned, yellowed, burned at the edges. But what made it impossible to dismiss was this. The letter had been written in 3 distinct handwritings, each switching every few lines, yet all part of one continuous thought. It read, "She didn't just break the children. She reassembled them into a code." The letter described the 47 not as victims, but as components, fragments of a larger system. Their names were patterns. Their traumas were rhythmic. And their silence wasn't absence. It was structure. The letter theorized that Augusta had discovered a principle hidden even from ancient mystics, that repeated pain, administered across precise intervals, could bind consciousness together, not just in a memory, but into architecture. The author called it sympathic architecture. Structures built not of stone, but shared agony. Rooms that could remember, floors that could hum, doors that whispered your name before you touched them. And Ravenshade wasn't the first prototype. The letter named 3 others: Briarhold Asylum in Tennessee, Ashwater Orphanage in Maine, and a now-demolished Himwell Cloister in Arkansas. All 3 were gone, burned, flooded, or swallowed by earth. But all 3 had left behind blueprints, not on paper but in dreams. The dreams always followed the same sequence: a hall of locked mouths, a spiral staircase made of hands, and, at the bottom, a door that opened inward endlessly. Those who had the dream began sleepwalking, not toward exits, not toward light, but toward the lowest place in the house: cellars, crawl spaces, wells. One child, 10 years old, was found beneath her home's floorboards, curled in the fetal position, whispering the phrase, "The girl is tuning us." Authorities dismissed it as mass hysteria. But one theologian, Father Elric Haynes, confessed in a sealed sermon that he had begun hearing tones inside stone walls, and sometimes, when alone in the confessional, a breath that wasn't his. His final sermon ended mid-sentence. He walked out of the church barefoot, eyes closed, humming a lullaby. For notes, always 4, and behind him, the bells of the church rang themselves. By spring of 1890, a pattern had emerged. Not in the sky, not in the stars, but in architecture. All across the eastern United States, churches, schools, and orphanages were being closed for structural irregularities. But it wasn't just crumbling foundations or mold-infested walls. The structures were changing. Windows that had once looked east were now facing north. Staircases lengthened overnight. Bells rang without wind. And beneath nearly every building closed for emergency demolition, surveyors found the same anomaly: a buried chamber, circular, with no entry point. Inside, nothing but soot. And on the walls, scratched by something not human, was a phrase: "She did not die. She divided." Researchers at the Blackfriars Institute for Occult Geometry published a private paper, since redacted, proposing that Augusta Blackthorn hadn't simply tuned the 47. She had partitioned herself across them, like a chord played through broken instruments. Each child held a fraction of her voice, memory, will, preserved in silence, waiting. Not for rescue, not for redemption, for reassembly. And the structures being affected weren't just buildings. They were hosts, vessels that had absorbed too much resonance, too many whispered confessions, too much trauma, too much echo, until they began to respond to her. One case, long suppressed, involved the reopening of Ravenshade's basement by government inspectors. They never made it past the 3rd step. Their lanterns refused to stay lit. Their compasses spun in slow, circular motions, and the air inside was warm, as if the basement had a pulse. The inspector's log ended with a single handwritten line: "The walls are listening." And they remember the order. 2 weeks later, every surviving staff member from Ravenshade, now elderly, scattered across 3 states, died within 24 hours of each other, all by internal bleeding. No signs of trauma, no connection between them, except one. Each was found clutching a rosary, and each rosary was missing the same bead, the one for "lead us not into temptation," as if someone or something wanted no resistance. Not now, because the reunion had begun, and deep beneath the soil, in a shape no human hand had carved, she was waiting, not to speak, to conduct. The next documented anomaly came from a mining town in southern Pennsylvania, Dyer's Hollow. It began as a series of tremors beneath the abandoned salt mines. Local officials suspected seismic activity, but the rumbling had rhythm. It occurred every night at exactly 3:47 a.m. Seismographs didn't record fault shifts, they recorded tones. Low, layered, measured, as if something beneath the earth was practicing. The townspeople began reporting auditory hallucinations, lullabies with no source. Entire families awoke at the same moment, claiming to hear the same voice. Always female, always soft, always just below perception. She whispered names, but not the names of the living. The names of the 47 children who had died decades earlier. Names no one should have remembered. A retired coal worker named Harris Cole went down into the mines to investigate. He left behind a journal entry, written in a tight, frantic scrawl. "There's no coal down here. Only teeth." Authorities found Harris 3 days later, in an abandoned mine shaft, kneeling before a wall of stone. He was humming. Behind him, carved neatly into the rock with unnatural precision, was a musical staff. 5 lines scratched so deeply it required industrial drills to remove. The notes etched on the staff spelled out something chilling when translated into phonetics. "I'm almost whole." The site was declared unstable and sealed, but within weeks, identical musical etchings began appearing in schools, churches, and courtrooms across the country, always faint, as if pressed from the inside of walls. In New Orleans, a piano that had been untouched for years began playing 3-note phrases whenever no one was in the room. In Denver, a choir director claimed a voice joined rehearsals during Vespers, low, slow, and 1 note behind everyone else, but always there. And at the center of each of these locations was a stone, black, porous, warm to the touch. Later analysis would show these stones were geologically impossible, formed under heat and pressure not found anywhere on Earth's surface. Each bore a marking on its underside, an open mouth, and no eyes, as if the stone itself had been listening for centuries, waiting for the final verse. And now it was beginning. By late 1890, a terrifying realization began to circulate among the few scholars still studying the Blackthorn case. This wasn't a haunting. This was a reconstruction. The children had not merely been victims. They were instruments used by Augusta to compose something far more vast, far more invasive than possession or poltergeist. She had created a resonant structure, not bound to wood or stone, but to memory itself. The proof came in a place no one expected. Dream journals. Across 7 institutions, mental hospitals, boarding schools, cloisters, patients and residents began documenting identical dreams. They all involve a single place. A basement with no ceiling. A room without doors. And the sound of laughter made of static. The dreams intensified with lunar cycles. Full moons triggered mass episodes of sleep paralysis. Dozens of patients described a woman standing over them, not speaking, just nodding in rhythm to a song that played from nowhere. Doctors assumed mass psychosis. But one, Dr. Elise Harland, went further. She compared 118 patient drawings of the dream woman. Each sketch was nearly identical. Thin frame, coiled hair, elongated fingers, and most disturbingly, no face, only a split, where the mouth should be, like a conductor's wound. She called it the chorus wound. In an act of desperation, Harland isolated the patients and played dissonant frequencies to disrupt what she believed was a shared psychic infection. It worked for 3 days. Then the humming returned, louder, from the walls. One night, the hospital's chapel organ, long disused, played itself during a thunderstorm. Witnesses say the keys didn't press. The sound came from inside the pipes, as if something was breathing through metal. By dawn, Harlan was gone. In her place, a handwritten note pierced through the wall with a rusted tuning fork. The note read, "The conductor does not return. She waits until the orchestra is rebuilt." And it was almost rebuilt, because scattered across the country, 47 young girls, all orphans, had gone missing in the same week. Each from a different state, each with no known relatives, each adopted shortly before disappearance. The names of their adoptive mothers? Every one of them was a known alias once used by Augusta Blackthorn. She had prepared new vessels, and now she was ready for the final movement. In November of 1890, a fire broke out at the Ravenshade Archives facility, a stone building that had stood untouched since the manor's closure. No known fuel, no weather, No witnesses. Only one thing survived. A scorched but intact music box, found beneath the basement rubble. It played a lullaby none of the local historians could recognize. A tune so haunting, it reportedly caused insomnia in those who heard it more than once. The melody was structured in 13 measures, but the last note was missing. Intentionally, as if the song was waiting to be finished. A private investigator named Samuel Vane took possession of the box and began tracing every piece of evidence tied to Augusta's final days. His research uncovered a series of financial records pointing to a hidden trust, still active, funding quiet purchases of remote properties, old churches, and orphanages. The name on the trust was not Augusta's. It was M.M. Vespers, a name that had appeared only once before, in a coded message inside the diary of one of the 47 children. Mother makes music. Mother is Vespers. Samuel tracked one of the purchased properties, a crumbling abbey outside Barrow, Vermont. There, he found something horrific. The abbey's bell tower had no bell. Instead, it held a giant metal cage, full of scorched dolls. Each doll had stitched mouths, and inside each one, placed in the chest, was a human tooth. All 47 dolls were accounted for, and pinned to the base of the cage was a single page of parchment, yellowed and torn. It wasn't a letter. It was a musical score, not for instruments, for locations. Each note corresponded to a city, a building, a basement, a body. It was a ritual composed in architecture, a song to be played not with voices, but with lives. Samuel went missing 2 days later. All they found was the music box, still playing. But this time, it had the final note. And when it played, dogs across the county howled. Clock stopped. The dead in nearby cemeteries were found face down in their graves. Coffins split from the inside. The final movement had begun, and she was no longer just memory. She was presence. By winter of 1890, government records show the quiet formation of a task force under the War Department, labeled simply Harrow Division. Its mission was classified: to investigate nonlinear psychological warfare and pattern-based psychic contagion. Unofficially, it was created for one purpose: to contain Augusta Blackthorn. But how do you contain a woman who no longer exists in flesh, but in vibration, in architecture, in ritual? The Harrow Division began by remapping the locations tied to the original 47 children. Not where they died, but where they were buried. A cartographer named Lewis Rourke discovered that the graves, when connected by straight lines, formed an elaborate sigil spanning over 400 miles. It wasn't random. It was a conductor's diagram, shaped to direct something, to gather resonance and point it inward, right back to Ravenshade Manor. But here's what terrified Rourke most. That same geometric pattern was being replicated, unintentionally, by modern city planning, electrical grids, and rail systems. It was as if Augusta's song had infected infrastructure. One official described it not as a haunting, but as a chord played through time itself. The Harrow Division issued a nationwide blackout of certain architectural blueprints, forbade new constructions in towns suspected of forming resonant patterns, and demolished 12 abandoned churches, quietly, with no public notice. Still, the phenomena escalated. In Boston, a courthouse collapsed after jurors claimed to hear children screaming from the stonework. In Richmond, a school shut down after students began humming the same lullaby, one none of them could recall learning. And in Ohio, a woman was arrested after digging up an entire cemetery, claiming she needed to rearrange the choir. Her name? Margaret Vespa, another alias. Same eyes, same voice. She didn't resist arrest. She only asked one question: is the orchestra in tune yet? What Harrow found next changed their mission entirely. In the tunnels beneath the woman's home was a vault, lined with mirrors. But the reflections didn't match. Each mirror showed a different version of Augusta, different ages, clothing, eras, as if the entity was testing appearances, deciding which self to wear next. On the ceiling, a fresco of 47 children, mouths open, eyes black, arms raised. And written beneath it all: memory can rot, but music decays slower. The Harrow Division began losing men. Not in combat, Not in the field. They vanished during sleep. It started with Commander Albrecht Keene, who had ordered the destruction of 6 orphanages that matched Augusta's original floor plans. He went to bed in his Washington home, kissed his wife goodnight, and was never seen again. No break-in, no struggle, no prints, just one thing left behind. A single violin string stretched tight across his pillow, and beneath it, a whisper written in salt. Conductors must not interrupt. Within weeks, 3 more agents disappeared. One was found wandering a train yard in Missouri, dazed, with his lips sewn shut, not with thread, but with hair. He had scrawled a phrase across his chest with a knife. "She is to him now." The Harrow Division went underground, literally, establishing a hidden facility beneath what is now Lakeview Asylum in Michigan. There, they tried to map Augusta's frequencies by building echo chambers designed to replicate her basement dimensions. They played old recordings. They brought in children with perfect pitch. They simulated trauma rhythms based on known Blackthorn rituals. The walls bled. Sound equipment warped. One of the children, a boy named Ellis, began screaming in a pitch that shattered the reinforced glass between observation rooms. But he wasn't in pain. He was laughing. When asked what he heard, he said, "The bells are upside down now." Augusta's song had begun rewriting how sound worked. Phonographs recorded conversations that hadn't happened yet. Tuning forks vibrated before being struck. Even language shifted. One agent lost the ability to say the word mother. His mouth would fill with blood every time he tried. Doctors said it was psychosomatic, but the blood spelled something on the table beneath him. The orchestra is seated. Religious institutions began to panic. Priests reported flocks going mute during sermons. Choirs who'd never missed a note began singing off-key, but in perfect harmony with the frequencies discovered in Augusta's manuscript. The Vatican issued a private bulletin to halt all exorcisms linked to basement phenomena. Because now it wasn't demonic. It was choreographed. And somewhere beneath the ruin of Ravenshade, Harrow agents found the truth. Augusta never needed to live forever. She only needed to be remembered in the correct pitch. And someone, or something, had found it. In January 1891, the coldest winter in a decade, Harrow Division initiated Protocol Contus, the final attempt to erase Augusta Blackthorn's influence from the world. It was not an exorcism. It was an erasure of resonance. Using reverse architecture, negative space design, and controlled demolition of every structure built within the sigil's frequency field. But Protocol Contus failed before it began. Because on the day of the first demolition, every mirror in the Harrow facility shattered, simultaneously. And inside the shards, agents saw something they could not unsee. Children swaying, in unison, as if awaiting a cue. They weren't real children. Not anymore. They were echoes, fragments of souls Augusta had folded into her composition. That night, the facility's chief acoustician, Dr. Miriam Kloss, recorded a strange hum coming from the foundation. When she slowed the frequency to 1/16 speed, it revealed not music, but breathing. The building itself was alive. Inhaling, Kloss vanished hours later, leaving behind a notebook with only one entry. The hymn doesn't end. It waits for new lungs. Meanwhile, reports emerged across the country. In Kansas, a church bell rang at midnight, despite having been melted down decades earlier. In Philadelphia, a boarding school held a recital. None of the girls had rehearsed, but they played the same exact piece, a melody no teacher could identify. When asked where they learned it, they all answered the same. "We heard it in our sleep." Witnesses reported the song was full of minor sevenths and inverted fifths, dissonant structures used in ritual music to warp emotional response. One man described it as, like someone singing through their own funeral. Not to mourn, but to conduct. The source was clear. Augusta had become distributed. She no longer needed a body or place. She existed across minds, across tones, across silence itself. Even the dead were not immune. Gravediggers reported corpses humming, not with mouths, but with chest cavities vibrating through decay. And then came the final sign. The Ravenshade wind chimes, missing since 1871, were were found reassembled on a tree outside the manor ruins. No wind, yet they rang. A perfect lullaby, each note falling like a countdown. And nearby, carved into stone by no human hand. The basement is above now. By spring of 1891, survivors began to speak in code. Not because they were trying to hide, because their words were changing. Anyone who had entered Ravenshade, or heard the lullaby more than once, began exhibiting lexical drift, replacing everyday words with musical references. Sleep became rest. Pain became sharpness. Silence became the pause before the note. One priest, Father Mallory, tried to document the transformations, but was found dead at his desk, face frozen mid-sentence, tongue split like a tuning fork. His journal read, "There is no language left, only arrangement." The Harrow Division issued a soft collapse, burning their files, destroying their research, sealing all properties connected to the Blackthorn sigil. They knew it was too late. Augusta was not a ghost. She was notation, and all it took was one survivor humming the right phrase, in a dark place, near foundation stone, to reactivate her. Because she wasn't haunting buildings. She was composed into them. Survivors from Ravenshade began to disappear. Not die. Disappear. Their names struck from census records. Portraits faded. Letters smudged beyond reading. It was as if history itself rejected them. One woman, Alice Morton, fled to Montana, believing she had escaped the curse. She built a cabin with no right angles, no musical resonance, no materials older than 5 years. Yet still at night, her walls contracted just slightly, as if the building were breathing in. And in the morning, carved into her bedroom floor. Chorister 34. She slit her own throat, but no blood was found. Only dust. The autopsy revealed her vocal cords had been rewound, as if prepared for reuse. From this point on, the Harrow Division's reports cease. But fragments survived. One final memo, encoded and hidden in the margins of a church hymnal, offered a chilling admission. We did not silence her. We helped finish the piece. Every effort to destroy her only completed her melody. And now that melody spreads, not through media, not through music, but through architecture, through memory, through anyone listening closely enough. Because Augusta Blackthorn was never just a mother. She was a conductor of memory. And the song? It plays us, the final known Blackthorn descendant, a mute boy named Nathaniel, was found wandering the woods outside Ravenshade in late 1891. He carried no papers, no scars, no clothing other than a smock stitched from choir robes. But he clutched a single item, a cracked metronome. The tempo? 47 beats per minute. Investigators took him to a secure facility, deep underground, surrounded by concrete, copper-lined walls, and no reflective surfaces. He didn't speak. He conducted, using nothing but his hands. When asked what he was conducting, he gestured to the room. They listened. At first, nothing. Then came the vibrations. Not through ears, through bones. The walls trembled, not from impact, but from recognition, as if the very stone knew the rhythm. Then Nathaniel did something that still defies explanation. He blinked once, and every light in the building pulsed in time with his metronome. Someone screamed, because they recognized the rhythm from their dreams. That same investigator would later claw out his ears, claiming, "The silence has teeth." It was at this point that the truth was accepted, reluctantly, and only among those who had seen the basement. The 47 children had never died in the traditional sense. They had been retuned. Augusta didn't murder them. She rearranged them, folded their essence into her composition like notes on a staff. That basement wasn't a prison. It was a score sheet. Each child a key, a chord, a breath in her great orchestral design. And Nathaniel? He was the final rest, the pause before the return. A reset. Harrow Division made a decision. They sealed the boy alive in a vault of white noise, surrounded by copper and mercury, forever beyond the reach of echo or rhythm. But even that wasn't enough. Because months later, the guards reported a sound. Not music. A single voice, speaking through 12 feet of lead. Rehearsal is over. When the vault was opened, Nathaniel was gone. No trace. No remains. Just the metronome. Still ticking. Faster now. 61 beats per minute. And etched in the floor beneath it, fresh and perfect. Basements were only the beginning. Now it's the attics. The ceilings. The steeples. We rise. The Blackthorn family had not been destroyed. It had been perfected. Not in blood, but in resonance. After 1891, Ravenshade Manor was buried under false names, erased from maps, and fenced by the state under the pretense of unstable land. But locals knew better. They heard it. No matter how many years passed, no matter how much soil was dumped, there was always a hum beneath the earth. Soft, rhythmic, faintly melodic. Farmers nearby reported strange phenomena. Cattle walking in perfect circles. Infants crying in harmony. And on cold mornings, frost forming in the shape of clefts and staves across window panes. They called it the ground's lullaby. In 1902, a private collector from Austria acquired what he believed was an antique phonograph cylinder from Ravenshade. When played, it emitted no music, only a deep, guttural inhalation that lasted for 2 minutes. Then silence. But those who listened to it couldn't stop hearing it. One man removed his own molars, convinced the sound was stored in his teeth. A music professor in Paris claimed she could see notation etched into shadows. When she painted what she saw, the oil cracked in spirals, and the canvas refused to stay silent. It emitted tones when touched. Governments around the world began quietly monitoring similar phenomena. Not ghosts, not demons. Frequencies. Places that vibrated wrong. Where time felt heavy. Where buildings seemed to lean toward you even if they stood still. And every time they traced the source, they found a structure built on the same foundation geometry Augusta had pioneered. Triangular basements with unequal pitch. Floorboards that resonated when walked upon. Stairwells that created echo spirals. They called them symphonic sites. By 1920, there were hundreds, some unknowingly built by architects who dreamed the same blueprints, unable to explain their inspiration. Because Augusta was no longer a composer. She was a contagion of design. Wherever people built, she whispered. Through dreams. Through vibrations. Through the hum behind drywall. And now, in modern cities, churches, hospitals, even homes, her architecture returns. Unnoticed, but aligned. Each piece falling into place. Each structure preparing to conduct. Because when the full symphony begins, it won't just be heard. It will be lived. And no one will remember a world before the music. In 1933, a sound technician named Harold Finch was hired to survey the ruins beneath what was once Ravenshade Manor. He brought with him the latest device, a parabolic microphone designed to capture infrasound. He expected silence. What he found was a rhythm beneath the earth. Not seismic, not natural. It was breathing, measured, mechanical, human. He recorded 6 hours of it and left the site in a panic. Days later, Harold was found dead, face contorted in a grin far too wide for his facial muscles. His tongue had been flattened and split down the center, like a bowstring. When forensic experts examined the tapes, they discovered something terrifying. Layered within the low hum was a voice. But not just any voice. It was every missing child from the 1871 basement, speaking in unison. And they said only one sentence. We were not buried. We were composed. From that day forward, the area around Ravenshade was declared non-constructible. Not because the soil was unstable, but because every structure built there collapsed within 47 days. Not from weather, but from disagreement. Wood warped. Steel turned brittle. Concrete crumbled, not from stress, but as if repelled by something deep below. Because beneath Ravenshade, the composition was still alive. Not static, not sleeping, arranging. Every tragedy that echoed its rhythm became a stanza. Every missing child, every unexplained voice, every out-of-tune bell, all of it folded into the greater design. In 1955, one of the few living survivors, a woman named Miriam Vale, gave a final interview before vanishing. When asked what Augusta had become, she whispered, "She is the key signature of sorrow, and we are the choir." She wept, then smiled, then screamed a sound no human throat should produce. The camera broke. The room shook. And when the footage was recovered, the timestamp was looping, always landing on 18 hours, 71 minutes. A time that doesn't exist, unless you understand the truth. Ravenshade never ended. It repeats. In basements. In walls. In forgotten corners of forgotten homes. And every time a child hums a melody they don't remember learning, she conducts again. There is no record of Augusta Blackthorn's death. No grave. No death certificate. No final sighting. Because death was never her aim. Oblivion was too quiet. She wanted immortality through memory, through sound. A living requiem composed of blood, brick, and breath. And now she has it. Every forgotten town with boarded windows. Every old piano with a single working key. Every house where the stairs creak in rhythm. They are all instruments. You're living inside the composition. It isn't horror. It's architecture. And when enough of it connects, when enough rooms echo the right chord, the final performance begins. You won't hear it with ears. You'll feel it in your chest. Your lungs will tighten to match the rhythm. Your heartbeat will fall in line. And just like the 47 children, you won't resist. You'll harmonize. Because the Blackthorn Symphony doesn't require permission. Only presence. You're not the audience. You're the choir. It begins when you start humming something you don't remember learning. It begins when shadows on your ceiling curve toward you, not away. It begins when the silence in your home grows so heavy, it feels like it's listening. And when you finally scream, it won't be your voice. It'll be hers. Because Augusta Blackthorn doesn't haunt. She plays. And now her score is nearly complete. Basements, attics, churches, schools, hospitals, apartments. You're standing on a stage. You just didn't know it. Until now. So if, tonight, you hear humming beneath your floorboards, don't move. Don't speak. Just listen. Because the final movement of Augusta's Requiem is about to begin. And Dead Scroll will be there to document every forgotten note. Subscribe if you're brave enough to follow the rest of this unfinished symphony. And comment below. The silence is tuned. Because the story isn't over. It's only resonating.